tell us what costly signaling is all about?
Costly signaling is a theory of biological communication in which it is acknowledged that it behooves organisms on some basis to signal one another, to communicate with one another. So the sender of signals is sending messages, communicating with a recipient of signals, and that recipient will only take those signals as reliable if he can perceive the cost. If the cost is perceived, whether it's a threat display or some other sort of display, another kind of showing off, that recipient can either be afraid or be happy, or in other words, respond to the signal itself, but only if it's perceived reliably as costly.
Why have you chosen to assess costly signaling in Hispanic culture?
Well, in this video, I am reflecting on a 5-year history that I had of living and starting and running a business in Colombia a number of years ago, in which I had the experience of economic development being tied to that sort of ethic that is based on either achievement or it's based upon honorary lineage. So as a result of my experience, I got to be interested in costly signaling really in the first place, and I am comparing the Protestant ethic with the ethic in Hispanic culture in a way that explains the kind of prestige that's rewarded in costly signaling, but rewarded in very different ways depending on the cultural context.
What is a Hispanic notion of dignity, and can other cultures see dignity differently?
Yes, there is a difference in dignity, which matters in evolutionary history as far as success, survival success, and reproductive success. In Hispanic culture, dignity is achieved mostly by inheritance, by who you are, not what you do. So as a result, if you engage in activities which are taxing, which are risky, you may not have any benefit from those activities in an Hispanic context. In fact, the exact opposite may occur. You may be considered too aggressive in your pursuit of achievement. But in other cultures, for example, Protestant ethnic cultures, you achieve individually, not as a member of a family. You can inherit prestige as a member of a family, but you do so more based upon your own achievement, and you are given more prestige based on your own achievement than you are of your family lineage.
Why do you use the term banking on prestige in your title?
Well, that's a very good question, and it really shows the difference of this paper from the way most evolutionists who talk about costly signaling explain it. Most evolutionists talk about it as if each individual in his own lifetime were signaling in a costly way. But the way I see it, especially based on my experience in Hispanic culture, individuals are banking prestige from generation to generation, and that constitutes their ability to do costly signaling. It's not their own achievement. It's not through their own efforts. It's based upon the prestige of their ancestors that they are able to be considered prestigious. So it's by inheritance and not by achievement. And it's a very different kind of a concept of costly signaling that goes from generation to generation quite reliably. This is what we call in history aristocracy, and we have it in all cultures because we inherit prestige from ancestors. But in Western culture, it is much more likely to be the product of individual achievement, individual behavior, than it is prestigious family lineages. In biological communication, the underlying assumption is sometimes various organisms benefit by signaling one another. These circumstances occur when communication contains information helpful for the survival or reproductive success of both the sender and the receiver of signals. The premise is that signals will be perceived by the receiver as reliable only if the costs to produce and send them are recognizably high. The motive for acquiring economic goods, according to traditional social science, is to satisfy the basic need for food, clothing, and shelter. From an evolutionary perspective, however, acquisition of valuables is about much more. In Darwinian sexual selection, individuals with high status generally leave the most descendants. A predictor of reproductive success, prestige is always a scarce commodity. Since social distinction is a hallmark of our species, high prestige is an aphrodisiac. costly signaling can be seen as the cover charge for entrance into the competition for sexual prominence. Upgrading oneself and downgrading others is an ongoing feature of status competition. Economic exchange is embedded in social relations. There are plenty of opportunities to enhance one's status for the right price. From an economic perspective, prestige can be viewed as a public good, finite in availability, created and distributed by signalers who compete based on the quality of their signaling performance. In cultures where prestige is rewarded through achievement, individuals go to great lengths to communicate their value by ingenuity and hard work. Climbing the social hierarchy requires outworking one's competitors. These signals of industriousness communicate one's willingness to burden oneself with productivity above and beyond one's financial need. Societies that value achievement based on intelligence and effort will, on average, experience the greatest long-term economic growth. This section evaluates early Protestant and Hispanic ways of thinking. The early Protestants considered industrious behavior evidence of religious salvation. Here's how Max Weber described the motive for economic gain. Man is dominated by the making of money, by acquisition as the ultimate purpose of his life. Economic acquisition is no longer subordinated to man as the means for the satisfaction of his material needs. The earning of money within the modern economic order is, so long as it is done legally, the result and the expression of virtue and proficiency in one's religious calling. And as de Tocqueville said about Americans, they are much more in love with success than glory. On the other side of things, the Spanish quest for social esteem is focused on the yearning to be somebody. Ortega y Gasset characterizes Hispanics in this way. The kings of Spain heard their people at confession, and in a delirium of frankness, the people said to them, "We do not clearly understand the preoccupations to whose service and culture other countries dedicate themselves. Our hearts desire less than nothing. We only want to be great." These two views stand in stark contrast to one another. For Weber's Protestants, an identity of distinction could be revealed by accomplishment. But according to Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish desire for eminence is based not on what one does, but on who one is. There is no equivalent in Hispanic Catholicism for what early Protestants referred to as being divinely called to a life's work. For the Hispanic, work is appropriate only for those who cannot escape it. As Don Quixote de la Mancha said, when prestige must be inherited, initiative is not only wasted, but also degrading. The most iconic fictional Spaniard of all time, Don Quixote de la Mancha, characterized the Hispanic ethos as the struggle to keep up the appearance of title, wealth, and an elevated code of public honor. As Castro said succinctly, to the Spaniard, his countrymen are more interesting for what they are than for what they produce. Vargas Llosa describes the Latin American self-image vis-a-vis the more developed North Americans. First they pillaged our part of the continent. Now they discriminate against us and look down upon us. We, although poor, are in some ways superior to our nouveau riche neighbors, thanks to the antiquity of our history, the glories of pre-Hispanic culture, our magnificent colonial past, and our more refined and aristocratic manners, so superior to their democratic gaucherie. In Hispanic context, prestige is based on the pedigree of prestigious ancestors, a phenomenon called transmissible gentility. Status competition in aristocratic societies is limited to intra-class maneuvering. The upper class is entitled, and the lower class is excluded. An aristocrat is expected to spend his time at leisure, engaged in activities that signal disinterest in making money. In Hispanic countries, the reputation of leisure class families has been banked by each generation of prestigious ancestors for the benefit of entitled descendants. As Rangel put it, the Spanish, in their moments of truth, admit to finding regular work singularly unattractive. The man who works does so in the hope that work will lead to his liberation, that someday he will stop working and really start living. Latin American scholar Henry Wells described the Hispanic world as underpinned by intrinsic dignity. This ethos, he wrote, applies to women as well as men. Agreeing with Wells about aristocratic women, Veblen comments, "The woman with distinguished antecedents is preferred in marriage, both for the sake of a resulting alliance with her powerful relatives and because a superior worth inheres in blood that is associated with many goods and great power." Hispanic stature depends greatly on one's support group of compadres. With its internal hierarchy, a compadrazgo group is led by the most distinguished individual who must assume some responsibility for the fortunes of lower-ranking members. If subordinates act too aggressively in money matters, they are considered usurpers of status and pretenders to gentility. By this constraint, economic endeavor is limited by not being able to do business with just anyone. Self-pride accompanied by stylishly limited effort serves an impediment to economic development because potential cooperation between business associates is hard to initiate and even harder to sustain. In life and death conflict, the Hispanic warrior is obliged to display personal courage, whether or not it helps win the battle. Nobility of spirit on the battlefield is an important legacy to future generations. In Spanish history, the heroic military figure has been more esteemed than the creator of great industrial institutions. A good death is considered truly honorific, an action that can bestow distinction on generations of descendants. The ideal death is a glorious one, replete with violence, in the service of a noble cause. In addition to the circumstances of one's death, extravagant funerals and costly gravestones visibly enshrine the hero's memory. The accessories of honor, statues, and monuments will remind descendants how privileged they are to inherit the prestige of this outstanding ancestor. Because status in prestigious families is inherited, there is little incentive to engage in economic endeavors. Not only do individuals not show initiative, they also influence other family members to be above such pursuits. Scholar Glenn Caudil-Deely characterizes the Latin American ethic as a place for everyone and everyone in his place. Since economic initiative has been suppressed in the Hispanic world, during which historic period would one expect Spain to have possessed its greatest wealth? Sociologist J.B. Cortes investigated the history of Spanish prosperity and concluded that 1492 to 1610 was Spain's economic zenith. That period began with the expulsion of the Jews and the confiscation of their property. This was followed in the Spanish colonies by gold and silver appropriation and exportation back to Spain. These additions to the Spanish treasure were gained by taking the valuables of others rather than building economic enterprises. Like most categories of human behavior, economic activity is greatly affected by the level of cooperation between individuals, families, and, in modernity, non-personal institutions. Evolutionists who employ costly signaling theory seldom appreciate the intergenerational value of inherited reputation that allows many generations to send costly signals of superior genealogy. I am today emphasizing two different models of costly signaling, one based on family lineage and the other on personal achievement. The consequence of functioning with one model or the other has a profound impact on the economic development. Where culture ennobles social status, inherited from ancestors, identity reflects who people are rather than what they do. For example, when one person is introduced to another in the Hispanic context, it is considered bad manners to ask your new acquaintance what he or she does for a living. A Spanish term inferring high status, hidalgo, is a contraction for hijo de algo, meaning son of something. In contrast, the term of derision, hijo de nada, means son of nothing. One is either born to be somebody or destined to remain a nobody. Malicia indígena refers to a conniving selfishness in social interaction and is present in most business relationships. The result is a lack of trust that severely limits collaboration. Here's an example. Yearly conferences by trade associations and industry groups are common in the United States, but rare in the Hispanic world. The exchange of ideas at these gatherings can only take place if individuals allow themselves to share knowledge. Cultures of pervasive suspicion have little regard for cooperation, a vital component of robust business environments. In the Hispanic context, only pre-existing personal relations allow quality business relations to develop. Only gente de confianza, trustworthy friends, can become business associates. This limitation, for example, disallows trusting a doctor's opinion just because he's a doctor, since only a prior personal relationship would enable a doctor to be fully trusted. By restricting business cooperation to the personal, businesses have two sources of potential clients: those with a personal relationship with a company decision maker and those who do not. If one has no personal relationships with company employees, he must establish whatever relationship he can if he needs the service or product the company provides. As companies expand, they become increasingly non-personal and detached from their customer base. This is a universal problem for growing companies everywhere, but it is an especially limiting condition in the Hispanic world. There are as many disadvantages as there are advantages to economies of scale and specialization in Hispanic countries, because expansion limits a company's ability for one-on-one personalized relations between managers, employees, and their customers. A personal example from my own experience. When I started a company in Bogota, I asked my Colombian associate which bank was considered the best. He told me there's no such thing as a good bank, only a trusting relationship with someone who works at a bank. The inability of businesses and clients to cooperate sufficiently on a non-personal basis is the greatest roadblock to large-scale economic development in Hispanic culture and underdevelopment all over the world. Thank you very much for tuning in.